On the 6th of April 1944, 15 million British workers received something they had never seen before, a tax code number. For the first time, the government could see exactly what you earned at work. What it could never see was everything else. Subscribe. Let us count down. Secret 10. The lodger in the box room. Before council housing waiting lists stretched for years, almost every working-class British home with a spare room took in a lodger, usually a single man working nearby, paying a weekly rate for the room and an evening meal. The arrangement was entirely verbal. No tenancy agreement, no landlord registration, no declaration to anyone. A lodger paying 15 shillings a week added the equivalent of a second wage to a household's income with zero administrative trace. The National Insurance Act of 1946, which came into force in January 1948, established the modern framework of contributions and benefits, but had no mechanism whatsoever for tracking informal rental income inside a family home. Your grandmother's lodger ate at her table, called her by her first name, and contributed more to that household's finances than any government department ever knew about. Secret 9. The bottle and errand economy. Every British child in the 1950s and 1960s had access to an economy entirely their own. Glass bottles, beer, pop, milk, carried a returnable deposit, typically a halfpenny per bottle, and children scoured back alleys, building sites, and roadside verges for empties discarded by adults, washed them, and returned them to the corner shop or the popman's van for cash on the spot. Beyond bottles, children ran errands for elderly neighbours, fetched coal, held places in queues, and were paid in pennies and halfpennies that never passed through an adult's hands at all. A resourceful child on a working-class street could earn several shillings a week this way, money that funded the Saturday cinema, sweets, and small contributions back into the household. None of it was recorded anywhere. The deposit return system that funded it quietly declined through the 1970s and 1980s as disposable cans and bottles without deposits became standard, removing not just an environmental incentive, but an entire informal children's economy that had operated on every street in Britain. Secret 8. Eggs over the fence. Before the British Egg Marketing Board's distribution network reached every corner shop, a family keeping 4 or 5 hens in the back garden produced more eggs than they could eat through spring and summer. The surplus went over the garden fence to neighbours for a few pence each, cash that changed hands in 2s and 3s, never counted, never declared. A household with 5 hens could generate the equivalent of a week's bread money from surplus eggs alone during peak laying season. Post-war planning regulations through the 1950s and 1960s increasingly restricted livestock keeping in urban gardens as housing density increased, and the egg-over-the-fence economy quietly vanished from British streets along with the hens themselves. Secret 7. The betting runner. Pattern break. Before 1961, there was no such thing as a legal betting shop on a British high street. The Street Betting Act of 1906 had made it a criminal offence to take a bet in the street, and the Betting Act of 1953 forbade any cash betting away from a racecourse. And yet, by the mid-1950s, economists estimated that illegal off-course betting in Britain turned over somewhere between £200 million and £300 million a year. How did it work? Every working-class street had a runner, a trusted local man, often someone with a legitimate job that gave him a reason to move freely through the neighbourhood. A milkman, a coalman, a postman. He collected betting slips and cash from houses along his round each morning, delivered them to a bookmaker operating out of a back room or a pub cellar, and returned later with winnings, all conducted in complete silence. The runner took a small commission on every bet. For some men, this informal commission exceeded their official wage entirely. A royal commission examined the situation in 1949 and concluded that the law was unenforceable and widely ignored by the public, the police, and the courts. The The Betting and Gaming Act of 1960 received royal assent on 29 July 1960, and from 1 May 1961, licensed betting shops were permitted to open for the first time in British history. Within 6 months, 10,000 betting shops had opened across the country. The Runners' Commission, the bookmakers' back room, and an entire informal economy that had operated in plain sight for over 50 years disappeared within months. The government did not close it down. It simply made it legal to do the same thing through a shop window and taxed it for the first time. Secret 6. Piecework from home. Before factory production lines became fully automated, many British textile and light manufacturing factories, particularly in the Midlands and the North, distributed components for assembly to women working from home, buttons to be sewn onto cards, garments to be finished, small components to be packed. A van delivered the materials on Monday and collected the finished work on Friday, paying cash by the piece. A woman with 3 or 4 hours a day available between household tasks could earn a meaningful supplementary income without ever leaving her house or appearing on any factory's payroll. This arrangement existed entirely outside the PI system introduced in 1944 because the women were not employees. They were, on paper, independent suppliers of finished goods, a classification that placed them outside the reporting requirements that applied to factory floor workers. Secret 5. The Christmas Goose Club. Every autumn, working-class families across Britain who had access to even a small patch of land bought a young goose, fed it through the winter on household scraps and whatever cheap feed could be found, and sold it in December, either to a single buyer or divided among several families who had each contributed to its feeding. A goose that cost a few shillings to acquire in October could be sold for considerably more by Christmas week, when demand for festive birds was at its highest and supply was tightest. The arrangement was informal, seasonal, and conducted entirely in cash between neighbours. It required no premises, no licence, and generated no paperwork of any kind, just a bird, a fence, and a calendar. Secret 4. The Allotment Surplus Round. Before supermarket supply chains made fresh vegetables available everywhere at all times, a well-managed allotment plot produced significantly more than a single family could consume during the growing season. Surplus runner beans, marrows and potatoes were loaded into a pram or a handcart and sold door to door along the street for whatever price the neighbour was willing to pay. The Small Holdings and Allotments Act of 1908 guaranteed access to allotment land, but said nothing about what was done with the produce grown on it. And the door-to-door surplus trade existed in a space the law had never anticipated and never attempted to regulate. A productive allotment, worked properly, could generate a meaningful seasonal cash income on top of feeding the family that worked it. Secret 3. Fixing and reselling at the market. Every working-class British man with basic mechanical aptitude understood a simple equation: a broken wireless, a bicycle with a puncture, a chair with a loose joint, a clock that had stopped. These things were worthless to whoever threw them out, and worth real money to whoever could make them work again. Saturday markets across Britain had stalls dedicated entirely to repaired and reconditioned goods, and the men who ran them bought broken items for pennies during the week, from house clearances, from rag and bone men, from neighbours glad to be rid of clutter, repaired them in a shed or a back room, and sold them at the weekend for a genuine profit. A bicycle bought broken for 2 shillings, fitted with a patch tube and an oiled chain, might sell for 15. The margin was almost entirely the value of skill and time, neither of which appeared on any balance sheet. This trade operated at every market in Britain well into the 1970s, conducted in cash between individuals with no register, no receipt, and no record of any kind. Secret 2. Mending and altering for the street. Every street had at least one woman known for her needlework, and she was rarely short of work from beyond her own family. Turning a collar, taking in a waistband, letting down a hem for a growing child, darning a heel beyond what the owner could manage themselves, all of it paid in small coins, handed over at the kitchen table along with the finished garment. A skilled needlewoman with a reputation could earn a steady supplementary income this way for decades. Work that required no premises, no advertising beyond word of mouth, and no record beyond what she chose to remember herself. Secret 1. The Rag and Bone Round. Before council recycling collections existed, every British street was visited regularly by a rag and bone man, a horse and cart, later a flatbed van, moving slowly through the terraces while the driver called out for old clothes, scrap metal and bones. Families who had been saving worn-out clothing, broken household items and kitchen bones through the week brought them out and received a few pence in exchange. Sometimes simply a balloon or a windmill for the children. The rag and bone man then sold what he had collected by weight to merchants, rags to paper mills, bones to glue and fertilizer producers, metal to scrap dealers. By the mid-1960s, the trade was already in steep decline. Manchester and Salford alone had around 60 rag merchants in the 1950s, a number that had fallen to about 12 by 1978. Nothing left your grandmother's house without someone, somewhere, paying something for it. None of these 10 things were illegal. None of them were hidden in the sense of being secret. They were simply never written down because writing them down had never occurred to anyone. That knowledge did not die. It just went quiet. It is time to start listening again.